Welcome to Marple Whispers. I'm Sean. Tell me, where are you listening from right now? And what time is it there? I'd love to know. Share it in the comments along with how you liked the story. I reply to every single one of you. Now, let's step into the mystery in the steamy depths of Budapest's legendary Gellert Bathhouse, where healing waters hide deadly secrets. An elegant baroness is found slumped in a private alcove, her skin flushed crimson, poisoned by invisible cyanide vapors that whisper of betrayal. Enter Miss Jane Marple, the unassuming English spinster with a razor-sharp mind, far from her quiet village, unraveling a web of lies among suspects. A brooding stepson with gambling debts, a glamorous Hollywood starlet entangled in scandal, a shady doctor with forged credentials, and an archaeologist guarding ancient curses. As shadows dance in the mist and alibis crumble like old mosaics, Miss Marple exposes a vengeful killer tied to a Vienna tragedy, where family fortunes and fatal grudges collide. Twists, motives, and a chilling method that turns paradise into a poisoned chamber. Will justice emerge from the fog? Dive into Murder in the Budapest Bathhouse, a Miss Marple mystery that grips you from the first breath. Chapter 1. The Steamy Invitation. The locomotive exhaled a final plume of steam as it ground to a halt at Budapest's Kaleti railway station, the iron beast seemingly reluctant to release its passengers into the crisp October air. Miss Jane Marple, bundled in her sensible woolen coat and clutching a carpet bag that had seen better days, stepped onto the platform with the measured caution of her 78 years. The station buzzed with a cosmopolitan energy quite alien to the quiet lanes of St. Mary Mead. Vendors hawking spicy sausages, porters shouting in guttural Hungarian, and the distant clang of trams echoing like impatient church bells. She inhaled deeply, catching the faint tang of roasted chestnuts mingled with the exotic spice of paprika, and felt a twinge in her knee that reminded her why she was here at all. It had been her nephew Raymond's doing, of course. Dear Raymond, ever the solicitous type, with his modern notions about health resorts and thermal cures. Aunt Jane, the Gellert baths are legendary, he'd enthused over tea in her cottage parlour. The mineral waters will work miracles on your rheumatism, far better than those draughty English spas. She demurred at first, protesting that adventures were for the young, but his persistence, coupled with a first-class ticket and a reservation at the Grand Gelert Hotel, had worn her down. Now, as she navigated the throng, she couldn't help but smile faintly. People were much the same wherever one went, rushing about with secrets tucked in their pockets, just like young Tommy Pierce back home, who'd thought no one noticed his pilfered apples until the vicar caught him red-handed. A uniformed concierge awaited her at the station's grandage arched exit, his name tag glinting under the gas lamps, Istvan Szabo. He was a slight man in his 50s, with a moustache waxed to improbable curls, and eyes that darted like minnows in a stream. Miss Marple, welcome to Budapest, the pearl of the Danube, he said in accented English, bowing with theatrical flair as he took her bag. The hotel has sent its finest carriage. You will find the Gelert a palace of wonders, Art Nouveau splendor, healing waters from deep beneath the earth. His voice carried the polished rhythm of one accustomed to charming tourists, but Miss Marple noted the faint tremor in his hands, as if he bore some unseen burden. How kind, she replied mildly, settling into the horse-drawn fiacre. As they clip-clopped through the bustling streets, past onion-domed churches and ornate bridges spanning the wide slate-grey Danube, she probed gently. Have you worked at the Geller long, Mr. Zabo? He nodded vigorously. 20 years, madam. Seen barons and beggars, stars of the silver screen, and scholars from afar, but none as observant as an English lady, I wager. She chuckled softly, thinking of how often flattery masked deeper motives, much like the postman's wife in her village, who'd buttered up the grocer only to shortchange him later. The Gellert Hotel loomed before them like a fairy tale confection, its facade a riot of turquoise tiles and wrought iron balconies, crowned by a glass-domed roof that caught the fading afternoon light. Istvan led her through the marble lobby, where crystal chandeliers dangled like frozen waterfalls, and the air hummed with multilingual chatter. "Your suite overlooks the river," he explained, handing her a heavy brass key. "And the baths. Ah, the baths. The finest thermal springs in Europe, fed by ancient aquifers. Guests swear by their restorative powers." Miss Marple thanked him with a tip that elicited another bow, then retired to unpack, her mind already cataloguing the hotel's inhabitants. A portly gentleman in a tweed suit arguing with the desk clerk, a glamorous woman in furs trailing a scent of expensive perfume. By evening, curiosity and a persistent ache in her joints drew her to the bathhouse wing. Descending a sweeping staircase, she entered a world of opulent indulgence, vast halls lined with Romanesque columns of pink marble, steam rising in lazy curls from pools of aquamarine water that bubbled gently, as if whispering secrets. Mosaic floors depicted mythical scenes of nymphs and gods, their colours vivid under the soft glow of electric lamps. The air was thick with the metallic tang of minerals, warm and enveloping, easing her stiffness almost at once. Attendants in crisp white uniforms directed her to the ladies' section, where she donned a modest bathing costume and slipped into the soothing depths. From her vantage in the shallow end, Miss Marple could overhear fragments of conversation drifting from the adjacent mixed bathing area, separated by a lattice screen that allowed sound but preserved propriety. A group had gathered around a central figure, a woman whose laughter rang out like crystal shattering on stone. Peering discreetly through the vapour, Miss Marple made out the Baroness Elena Kovacs, a vision of continental elegance in her 40s, with raven hair piled high and eyes that gleamed like polished emeralds. She reclined on a tiled ledge, her silk robe draped artfully, entertaining her companions with tales of Viennese balls and Riviera escapades. Beside her sat Victor Kovacs, her stepson, a lean young man in his 20s, with the hollow cheeks of one who gambled more than he slept. His fingers drummed restlessly on the pool's edge, and Miss Marple noted how his gaze flickered toward the Baroness with a mix of resentment and calculation, reminding her of young Mr. Hargreaves in St. Mary Mead, who'd eyed his stepmother's jewellery box with similar intensity before that unfortunate incident with the missing pearls. Across from them lounged Dr. Laszlo Ferenc, a rotund physician with a balding pate and a voice like gravel underfoot, expounding on the virtues of hydrotherapy. "The waters here balance the humours, my dear Baroness," he boomed, his hand brushing hers perhaps a fraction too long. "A cure for all ailments of body and spirit." Completing the circle was Clara Beaumont, the American film actress whose face had graced magazine covers even in rural England. Blonde and vivacious, with lips painted a daring scarlet, she leaned toward Victor, her laughter a trilling counterpoint to the Baroness's deeper tones. But Miss Marple's sharp eyes caught the undercurrents. Clara's possessive grip on Victor's arm, the Baron's subtle flinch at the doctor's touch, Victor's averted gaze when inheritance was jestingly mentioned. Such a lively set, Miss Marple murmured to herself, adjusting her spectacles as steam fogged the lenses. But liveliness often hides sharper edges, like the garden club ladies who smiled through their feuds until poor Mrs. Bantry's rose show ended in tears. The clock in the hall chimed 9, its toll muffled by the humid air. For a moment, the bathhouse fell into a languid hush, broken only by the drip of condensation and the occasional splash. Then, from the direction of the private steam rooms, secluded alcoves reserved for the elite, a scream pierced the tranquillity, raw and terror-stricken, echoing off the vaulted ceilings like a harbinger of doom. Miss Marple's knitting needles paused mid-stitch in her lap. Around her, bathers froze, towels clutched like shields. The scream hung in the air, fading into gasps and hurried footsteps, and in that instant the healing waters of Budapest turned ominously chill. Chapter 2. The Body in the Vapour. The scream that shattered the bathhouse's steamy serenity seemed to hang in the air like a malevolent fog, refusing to dissipate even as footsteps pounded across the slick tiles. Miss Jane Marple, still immersed in the warm embrace of the ladies' pool, felt a chill race up her spine despite the heat. She wrapped her towel tightly around her frail form and hurried toward the source, her slippers squelching softly. Other bathers emerged from alcoves and pools, faces pale and questioning, murmuring in a babel of languages, Hungarian, German, English accents mingling like the vapours themselves. The cry had come from one of the private steam rooms, those secluded chambers tucked away in a labyrinth of corridors, where the wealthy could indulge in solitary soaks away from prying eyes. A young chambermaid, no more than 18 with freckles dotting her cheeks like spilled paprika, stood trembling at the threshold, her apron askew and eyes wide with horror. "Hallot! She's dead!" she gasped in Hungarian, clutching the doorframe as if it were her only anchor. Miss Marple, arriving among the first, peered past her into the dim, misty interior. There, slumped against the tiled bench like a discarded marionette, was Baroness Elena Kovacs. Her once vibrant skin was now a grotesque shade of crimson, flushed as if she'd been boiled alive, and her emerald eyes stared blankly at the ceiling, devoid of their earlier sparkle. A faint, peculiar odour wafted out, bitter almonds sharp and unnatural amid the usual mineral tang. The Baroness's robe had slipped open slightly, revealing no visible wounds, only the unnatural stillness of death. Steam continued to hiss from the vents, curling around her form like spectral fingers, as if the bathhouse itself mourned her passing, or mocked it. "Out of the way, please!" barked a voice from behind, and Herr Karl Müller, the hotel manager, pushed through the gathering crowd. A stout Austrian in his 50s, with a balding head gleaming under the lights, and a uniform strained at the seams, he exuded the flustered authority of a man whose domain had been violated. This is a tragedy. Heart failure, no doubt. The heat, it overwhelms even the strongest constitutions. His German-inflected English was clipped with anxiety, and Miss Marple noted how his hands fumbled with a handkerchief, dabbing at non-existent sweat. He quickly cordoned off the area with a velvet rope from a nearby stand, shooing away the curious-like flies from a picnic. "Back to your rooms, everyone. The police will handle this." Word spread faster than the steam could rise, and soon the bathhouse echoed with gasps and speculation. Miss Marple lingered unobtrusively, her keen blue eyes scanning the faces. Victor Kovacs arrived breathless, his hair tousled as if from a hasty dressing, his expression a mask of feigned shock that didn't quite reach his calculating gaze. Dr. Laszlo Ferenc bustled in next, medical bag in hand, though his portly frame suggested he was more accustomed to prescribing soaks than performing heroics. Clara Beaumont appeared last, her makeup slightly smudged, as if applied in haste, her American poise cracking with a theatrical hand to her forehead. "Elena? Oh, God, not Elena," she wailed. But Miss Marple detected a note of rehearsal in the cry, reminiscent of the village amateur dramatics, where emotions were always a touch overdone. The Budapest police arrived with commendable speed, their boots clicking on the marble like the ticking of a doomsday clock. Leading them was Inspector Garbonaghi, a towering figure with a hawkish nose that seemed perpetually sniffing for clues, and a chain of cigarettes that he lit one after another, the smoke blending seamlessly with the bathhouse haze. His eyes, sharp as a falcon's, swept the scene, taking in every detail. The position of the body, the hissing vents, the lingering almond scent that made his nostrils flare. "Seal the area," he ordered his assistants in crisp Hungarian, then switched to English for the international guests. "No one leaves the hotel until questioned. This may not be as natural as it appears." While the inspector conferred with Herr Müller, Miss Marple retreated to the lobby, settling into a plush armchair with her knitting bag. The rhythmic click of her needles provided a soothing counterpoint to the chaos, and from her vantage she could overhear the initial interviews without drawing attention. She had always found that people dismissed an elderly lady with yarn as harmless, much like old Miss Weatherby in St. Mary Mead, who had uncovered a forgery ring simply by listening at tea parties. First came Victor Kovacs, slouching into a chair opposite the inspector, his wet swimsuit peeking from under a robe, as if he'd come straight from the pools. "I was in the men's plunge pool the whole time," he insisted, his voice edged with defiance. "Diving, cooling off, after the steam. Ask anyone. There were witnesses." But Miss Marple noted the slight hesitation, the way his fingers twisted a ring on his hand, a telltale sign of evasion, like young Freddie Sanders who'd lied about poaching rabbits until the feathers gave him away. Dr. Ferenc followed, mopping his brow with a monogrammed handkerchief. "I was in my office, consulting with a patient, Mrs. Hargrove, the English widow with gout. She'll vouch for me." His gravelly tone carried conviction, but Miss Marple wondered at the beads of sweat on his upper lip, unrelated to the heat. Doctors, in her experience, were adept at hiding symptoms, both their patients' and their own. Clara Beaumont's interview was a performance worthy of the silver screen. "I was in my suite, darling, applying my evening makeup. A girl has to look her best, even in a spa." She fluttered her lashes at the inspector, who remained unmoved, jotting notes with a skeptical frown. Miss Marple observed the starlet's hands. Steady now, but earlier they'd trembled. Actresses were masters of deception, she recalled, thinking of the touring troupe that had passed through her village, leaving behind a trail of broken hearts and pilfered silver. As the night deepened, the body was removed under a sheet, the private room scrubbed by solemn attendants. Inspector Nagy huddled with the coroner in a corner, their voices low but audible to Miss Marple's attuned ears. "Cyanide," the coroner murmured, "definite traces in the lungs and bloodstream. Inhaled, perhaps, through the steam, or absorbed via a tainted towel. No needle marks, no ingested residue." The inspector's face hardened. "A devilish method. No weapon to trace, no fingerprints in this watery mess. Whoever did this knew the bathhouse intimately." Miss Marple stifled a nod, her mind drifting to old Mrs. Fletcher in St. Mary Mead, who'd slipped arsenic into a rival's teacup at the church fete, all smiles and sympathy. Poison was indeed a subtle art, often favoured by those who preferred distance from their deeds, women perhaps, but motives crossed all boundaries. She pondered the almond scent. Hydrogen cyanide released its telltale odour, but only the perceptive would notice it amid the bath's vapours. Whispers rippled through the lobby as guests dispersed. The Baroness had been seen arguing with Victor that morning over finances. Dr. Ferenc had been overheard pleading for a loan. Clara's affair with the stepson was an open secret, thwarted by the Baroness's disapproval. And then, the juiciest rumour, Elena Kovacs had been rewriting her will, disinheriting Victor in favour of some enigmatic beneficiary. A charity? A lover? Who knows? Murmured a dowager to her companion. Miss Marple tucked away these tidbits like stitches in a complex pattern. Retiring to her suite at last, the Danube's lights twinkling outside her window, Miss Marple lay awake, her mind as active as the hotel's groaning pipes. The bathhouse, with its hidden passages and hissing secrets, was a perfect stage for murder. But who had scripted this tragedy? Victor, with his gambler's desperation. The doctor, hiding debts, Clara, masking jealousy behind glamour, or someone else, lurking in the steam. She closed her eyes, the almond scent lingering in her memory, a clue as elusive as mist. Tomorrow, she resolved, she would unravel more threads, gently, unobtrusively, as was her way. For in the world of human folly, patience always revealed the pattern. Chapter 3. Shadows in the Steam. The morning sun filtered through the Gellert Hotel's stained-glass windows, casting kaleidoscopic patterns on the lobby floor like scattered jewels from a thief's haul. Miss Jane Marple, refreshed after a fitful night punctuated by dreams of swirling mists and hidden daggers, descended the grand staircase with her customary poise. The air still carried a faint undercurrent of last evening's tragedy, the sharp, acrid memory of almonds that no amount of ventilation could fully dispel. Yet life at the spa pressed on. Guests murmured in hushed tones over breakfast, their eyes darting suspiciously, as if death had tainted the very waters they sought for healing. Determined to immerse herself further in the bathhouse's rhythms, Miss Marple joined a guided tour, advertised on a high, gilt-framed notice board. Discover the secrets of Gellert, architecture and ancient waters, it promised, led by none other than Istvan Chabot, the concierge with his ever-curling moustache. A small group assembled in the echoing vestibule. Victor Kovacs, looking haggard with dark circles under his eyes, as though sleep had eluded him. Clara Beaumont, her glamour subdued by a simple day dress, but her scarlet lips still a bold statement. Dr. Laszlo Ferenc, puffing slightly from the short walk, his medical bag slung over one shoulder like a reluctant accomplice. And joining them was a newcomer, Professor Emil Zoltan, a wiry archaeologist in his 60s with sun-weathered skin and hands roughened by years of sifting through earth. He fiddled absently with an antique Roman coin, its edges worn smooth, as he introduced himself with a scholarly nod. "I've been excavating the Aquincum ruins nearby," he explained in precise, accented English. "The Baroness was a generous patron, fascinated by the thermal springs' pagan history. Did you know the Romans believed these waters were cursed by underworld gods? A fitting lore for such a place." Istvan cleared his throat dramatically, ushering them into the bathhouse proper. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the heart of Gellert. Built in 1918, this Art Nouveau marvel draws from springs that have bubbled for millennia." His voice resonated off the vaulted ceilings, where cherubs and sea creatures frolicked in mosaic splendour. As they wandered the labyrinthine halls, Past bubbling fountains and alcoves scented with eucalyptus, Miss Marple's eyes missed nothing. The group moved in a loose cluster, but tension simmered like the pools themselves. Victor lagged behind, his gaze fixed on Clara, who walked with exaggerated nonchalance. In a shadowed corner near the Roman-style plunge pool, Miss Marple caught the flicker of movement. Clara's hand brushing Victor's as she slipped him a folded note. He pocketed it with a furtive glance, his fingers lingering a moment too long, much like the way young Arthur had passed billets due to the milkmaid in St. Mary Mead, before that led to a shotgun wedding and whispered scandals. Further along, Dr. Ferrance paused to inspect a brass vent grating, his brow furrowed. "This system is archaic," he grumbled to Herr Müller, who had joined the tour uninvited, his managerial presence as stiff as his starched collar. "The pipes are prone to blockages, the valves temperamental. In my professional opinion, it's a hazard. Someone could tamper with them easily, introducing contaminants or worse." His voice echoed sharply off the tiles, drawing stares. Herr Müller flushed, his bald pate shining. "Nonsense, Doctor. Our maintenance is impeccable. These vents have served flawlessly for decades." But Miss Marple noted the manager's evasive eyes, reminiscent of the village plumber who'd sworn his work was sound until the floods proved otherwise. Tampering, she mused. Could that explain the cyanide's delivery? A subtle sabotage, invisible in the haze. The tour concluded in the grand central hall, where steam rose in ethereal columns from the main pool, veiling the bathers in mystery. Professor Zoltan expounded on ancient rituals, his coin glinting as he gestured. The Romans used these springs for divination, steam as a medium for omens. Perhaps the Baroness saw her fate in the vapours. His tone was light, but Miss Marple detected an undercurrent of unease, as if he spoke from personal shadows. She recalled a similar academic in her village, Dr. Haydock's friend, who'd buried secrets deeper than any artifact. Dispersing for luncheon, Miss Marple chose a table in the riverside cafe, its panoramic windows framing the Danube's sluggish flow under a leaden sky. Sipping chamomile tea, her preferred brew for clarity, she positioned herself near a potted palm, the perfect screen for observation. Victor and Clara soon appeared, selecting a secluded corner booth. Their heads bent close, voices low but audible in snatches carried by the breeze from an open pane. "That will of hers, it's a farce," Victor hissed, his face contorted. "Everything to that charlatan professor, after all her promises. But I have proof, Clara. She was being blackmailed. Letters, hidden in her suite, if we can find them." Clara's hand clutched his arm, her nails digging in. "Darling, be careful. The police are watching. And what if it's true? What if Zoltan knew her secrets?" Miss Marple's cup paused mid-sip. Blackmail was a timeless venom, like the vicar's wife back home, who'd paid hush money for a long-ago indiscretion, only for it to fester into ruin. Who held the Baroness's leash? And how did it connect to the fatal steam? The afternoon brought a fresh ripple of drama. As guests returned to the changing rooms, vast chambers lined with oak lockers and mirrors fogged by perpetual humidity, a commotion erupted. Professor Zoltan burst into the lobby, dishevelled and indignant, clutching a leather briefcase that gaped open like a wounded animal. "Thief! Someone's rifled through my things!" he bellowed, drawing Inspector Nagy from his makeshift office in a side parlour. The archaeologist's artefacts lay scattered. Shards of pottery, a rusted fibula pin, and most damning, a small glass vial labelled with a skull and crossbones, its contents a crystalline powder. Inspector Nagy's hawkish eyes narrowed as he donned gloves to examine it. Potassium cyanide, Professor? An odd tool for digging up the past. Zoltan's face paled beneath his tan. It's for preservation, stabilizing fragile relics against decay. Perfectly legal in my field. I keep it locked away. Someone must have planted it to frame me. He gestured wildly, the Roman coin slipping from his pocket to clatter on the floor. Miss Marple, observing from a nearby settee, bent to retrieve it, her fingers brushing its inscribed surface. IMP Caesar, it read, a relic of emperors and betrayals. Planting evidence, she thought, a classic ploy, like the time the gardener's lad had hidden stolen goods in the sexton's shed to deflect blame. The inspector escorted Zoltan for questioning, the vial confiscated as evidence. Whispers ignited anew, the professor's digs funded by the Baroness, but rumours of disputes over artefacts she claimed as her own. Had he silenced her to keep his treasures? Or was this a diversion, orchestrated by another hand? Miss Marple slipped away to the ladies' lounge, her mind weaving connections. The note between Victor and Clara, planning a search. Dr. Ferentz's fixation on the vents, a red herring or guilty knowledge. And Herr Müller's defensive bluster, hiding negligence or something darker. As twilight descended, the bathhouse lights flickered on, casting long shadows that danced like phantoms in the steam. Miss Marple wandered the corridors alone, her footsteps muffled, pausing at a vent where warm air whispered secrets. She traced the brass grill with a finger, feeling the faint vibration of hidden mechanisms. Shadows indeed, she murmured, recalling how in St. Mary Mead the darkest deeds hid in plain sight, behind smiles and civilities. The cyanide vial was a bold stroke, but who benefited from Zoltan's suspicion? The pieces were aligning, slowly, like tiles in a mosaic revealing a face, or a mask. Back in her suite, she jotted notes in a small diary, the Danube's lights winking like accomplices outside. The tour had unveiled more than architecture. It had exposed fractures in alliances, hints of desperation. Blackmail, tampering, planted clues, the web tightened. Tomorrow she would probe deeper, perhaps with a word to the inspector. For now, the steam's shadows held their breath, waiting for the next revelation to break the surface. Chapter 4. Whispers from the Past. The Gellert Hotel awoke to a sky bruised with storm clouds, the Danube outside churning like a restless conscience. Miss Jane Marple, seated at her suite's writing desk, sipped her morning tea and reviewed her notes, the faint scratch of her pen echoing the patter of rain against the windows. The Baroness's murder had stirred the hotel like a stone dropped in a still pool, ripples of suspicion spreading to every guest and servant. Yet, as Miss Marple knew from countless village intrigues, the truth often lay not in the loudest accusations, but in the quiet whispers of the past, secrets buried like old bones, waiting for a patient hand to unearth them. Determined to trace the roots of the tragedy, she sought out Inspector Gabor-Nagy, finding him in the hotel's oak-panelled smoking room, surrounded by curling cigarette smoke and crumpled reports. His hawkish face softened slightly at her approach, perhaps amused by the sight of an elderly English woman in a lavender cardigan, clutching a knitting bag like a talisman. "Miss Marple, you're up early," he said, exhaling a plume that mingled with the room's hazy air. "Have you come to offer another village anecdote to solve my case?" His tone was teasing, but his eyes betrayed respect. Her gentle probing the previous day had already nudged him toward overlooked details, like the steam vent's peculiar residue. I merely thought, Inspector, she replied with a disarming smile, that a woman like Baroness Kovacs might have left traces of her life beyond Budapest, traces that could illuminate her death. She suggested a visit to the city's archives, where old newspapers and records might reveal connections to the suspects. Nagy, intrigued despite himself, agreed to arrange access, provided she was escorted. But tread lightly, madam. This is no village squabble. Cyanide is a ruthless player. Miss Marple nodded, thinking of Mrs. Eldridge back in St. Mary Mead, whose quiet poisoning of her husband had been uncovered only by a stray letter in the parish records. Istvan Szabó, ever the dutiful concierge, accompanied her to the Budapest City Archives, a cavernous building near the Chain Bridge, its shelves groaning with the weight of history. The air smelled of dust and aged paper, and the clerk, a bespectacled man with ink-stained fingers, eyed Miss Marple's prim demeanour with curiosity as she requested files on the Kovacs family. Istvan translated her queries with flair, though she noticed his hands fidgeting, as if the task unsettled him. The Baroness was a private woman, he remarked unprompted. Came to Budapest 3 years ago, after troubles in Vienna. Miss Marple filed away his hesitation, recalling how the butcher's boy had stammered when questioned about stolen sausages, betraying his guilt. The archives yielded a trove of faded newsprint. Baroness Elena Kovacs, née Elena Varga, had indeed fled Vienna after her husband, Baron Istvan Kovacs, died in a mysterious accident. Cyanide poisoning, the papers hinted, though officially ruled a suicide. The scandal had cast a long shadow. Whispers of infidelity, financial ruin, and a disputed inheritance. One article mentioned a family feud over the Varga estate, a fortune in land and jewels that Elena inherited upon her marriage, much to the chagrin of distant relatives. Intriguingly, a name surfaced in the margins. Dr. Laszlo Ferenc, whose hydrotherapy clinic in Vienna had treated the late Baron during his final months. Curious, Miss Marple murmured, her fingers tracing the yellowed page. A doctor linked to both husband and wife, across cities and years. It was like the time Dr. Haydock's locum in St. Mary Mead had been found prescribing dangerous tonics, his past catching up like a vengeful ghost. Back at the Gellert, the atmosphere crackled with unease. The rain had driven guests indoors, crowding the lobby with restless energy. Miss Marple settled into a corner armchair, her knitting needles clicking a steady rhythm as she observed. Victor Kovacs paced near the grand staircase, his face a storm of its own, muttering to himself about that cursed will. Clara Beaumont, draped in a silk shawl, approached him with a furtive glance, her voice low but sharp. "You swore we'd be free, Victor, free to leave this gilded cage. But those letters, if the police find them first—" Her words trailed off as she noticed Miss Marple's presence, her eyes narrowing before she forced a brittle smile and retreated. Miss Marple's needles paused. Letters again, as Victor had mentioned to Clara during the tour. Blackmail, perhaps, or something more personal. She recalled the vicar's sister, who'd kept compromising letters from a lover, only for them to spark a feud that ended in tragedy. The day's tension escalated at dinner, served in the hotel's opulent dining room, where crystal goblets gleamed under chandeliers like watchful eyes. Professor Emil Zoltan, released after questioning but still under scrutiny, sat alone, his Roman coins spinning idly on the tablecloth. Miss Marple, seated nearby, engaged him in polite conversation about his work. "The Baroness funded my excavations," he admitted, his voice tinged with bitterness. but she demanded artifacts, priceless relics, as collateral. When I refused to part with a rare votive tablet, she threatened to cut my funding. His fingers tightened around the coin, and Miss Marple noted the intensity in his eyes, like old Mr. Grimsby, who'd hoarded his stamp collection with near-manic zeal, until it drove him to ruin. As coffee was served, a disturbance erupted near the staff entrance. A porter, breathless and wide-eyed, reported a sighting. A cloaked figure tampering with the steam vents near the private rooms just after dusk. Herr Müller, ever the anxious overseer, dismissed it as a prank, but doubled the night watch, his face pale as the linen napkins. Inspector Nagy, summoned from his temporary office, interrogated the porter, who swore the figure moved with purpose, vanishing into the bathhouse's maze. "A shadow in the steam," the inspector muttered, lighting another cigarette. Miss Marple, sipping her coffee, considered the vents again, those conduits of heat and perhaps poison. Could the tampering be a desperate act to cover tracks or a new scheme unfolding? It echoed the time the village hall's boiler had been sabotaged to hide a theft, the culprit betrayed by a smudge of coal dust. Retreating to the lounge, Miss Marple overheard Dr. Ferenc arguing with Istvan near the concierge desk. "You saw her that night, Sabot. Don't deny it. She was furious about the will. Said she'd expose everyone." Istvan's moustache quivered as he hissed back, "Keep your voice down, doctor. I merely delivered her towels. She was alive when I left." Their words, sharp as shards, cut through the hum of a conversation. Miss Marple's needles resumed their dance. Istvan's role as go-between was more complex than he let on, much like the postmistress who'd known every secret in St. Mary Mead, but played the innocent. As night fell, the rain intensified, drumming a relentless tattoo on the hotel's roof. Miss Marple sat by her window, the Danube a dark ribbon below, and pieced together the fragments: the Vienna scandal, tying the Baroness to Dr. Ferenc, the disputed will, dangling wealth just out of Victor's reach, Clara's desperate whispers of freedom, Zoltan's precious artifacts, threatened by a patron's greed, and now a shadowy saboteur in the vents. Each clue was a thread, weaving a tapestry of motive and opportunity. But the past, she sensed, held the key. Whispers of old betrayals, echoing through Budapest's steamy halls. Tomorrow she would press further, perhaps coaxing Istvan's nervous tongue, or probing Clara's brittle facade. For now, she closed her diary, the words cyanide and Vienna underlined twice. The bathhouse's vapours were thick with more than heat. They carried the weight of history, and Miss Marple was determined to clear the air. Chapter 5. The Gathering Storm. The rain that battered Budapest's Gellert Hotel had turned the Grand Salon into a gilded cage, its Art Nouveau splendour dimmed by the storm's relentless drumming against the tall windows. Miss Jane Marple sat near a roaring fireplace, her knitting needles clicking softly, a picture of serene domesticity amid the crackling tension of the gathered guests. Inspector Gabor Nagy had summoned everyone connected to Baroness Elena Kovac's murder for a compulsory meeting, his hawkish silhouette pacing before the ornate mantelpiece, cigarette smoke curling like a question mark. The air was thick with unspoken accusations, as if the storm outside had driven all secrets indoors to fester. Miss Marple's keen eyes surveyed the room. Victor Kovac slouched in a velvet armchair, his gambler's hands fidgeting, his face a mask of sullen defiance that reminded her of young Tommy Pierce, who'd sulked through a village inquest after stealing apples. Clara Beaumont perched on a chaise longue, her American poise strained, her fingers twisting a silk handkerchief as if strangling her own nerves. Dr. Laszlo Ferenc stood by a window, his portly frame rigid, his gravelly voice silent for once, though his eyes darted like a cornered animal's. Professor Emil Zoltan, still shaken from his brush with suspicion, clutched his Roman coin like a talisman, his scholarly calm fraying at the edges. Herr Karl Müller hovered near the door, his managerial composure cracking as he adjusted his tie with trembling fingers. Istvan Sabot, the concierge, lingered by a sideboard, pouring coffee with exaggerated care, his moustache twitching as if it knew secrets his lips dared not speak. Inspector Nagy's voice cut through the murmurs, sharp as a blade. Baroness Kovacs was poisoned with cyanide, delivered through the steam vents of her private room, a method both cunning and cruel. Each of you had opportunity, and motives are emerging like weeds. He brandished a notepad, his notes scrawled in a spidery hand. Victor Kovacs, you stood to lose a fortune. The Baroness's new will cut you out entirely. Miss Beaumont, your affair with Bus Victor was no secret, and her interference threatened your future. Dr. Ferenc, you owed her substantial sums from a failed venture. Professor Zoltan, she held your precious artifacts hostage. And Herr Müller, your hotel's reputation hangs by a thread if this murder goes unsolved. His eyes swept the room, daring contradiction. Miss Marple, her knitting a steady rhythm, interjected softly, her voice carrying the deceptive mildness of a village spinster. Inspector, if I may, sometimes it's the smallest details that unravel the knot. The Baroness's skin, so flushed beyond the heat's effect, suggests a rapid poison. And that almond-like scent? Cyanide, yes, but how was it introduced so precisely in a steam-filled room? Her words hung in the air, and the suspects shifted uncomfortably, as if her gentle probing had stirred a hidden current. She continued, her tone unchanged. I wonder, too, about the timing. The scream came at 9, but who was near the private rooms before then? It was a question she'd learned to ask in St. Mary Mead, where the hour of a theft often pointed to the thief. Victor's head snapped up. I told you, I was in the plunge pool. Dozens saw me. His voice cracked, betraying a desperation Miss Marple recognized from the village's wayward youths. Clara's eyes flickered toward him, her lips parting as if to speak, then closing tightly. Dr. Ferenc cleared his throat. I was with a patient, as I said. Mrs. Hargrove's gout required my attention. But his fingers drummed on his medical bag. A nervous tick Miss Marple noted, like the curate who'd fidgeted when questioned about missing arms. Suddenly, Clara stood, her handkerchief falling to the floor. This is absurd. You're accusing us all when it could have been anyone, a maid, a porter, some stranger. Her voice trembled, but Miss Marple caught the calculated pause, as if she'd rehearsed this outburst for a screen test. Nagy raised an eyebrow. And you, Miss Beaumont? Your makeup case? My men found a hidden compartment. Pills, perhaps? Or something more lethal? Clara's face drained of colour, and she sank back, stammering, Those were headache powders, nothing more. Miss Marple's needles paused. Hidden compartments were a staple of deception, like the secret drawer in Mrs. Bantry's desk that had concealed a lover's letters. The room's tension snapped like a taut wire when Dr. Ferenc lurched toward the door, his bulk knocking over a silver tray. I won't be hounded like this, he bellowed, but Istvan, surprisingly nimble, blocked his path. Stay, Doctor, Nagy commanded, his tone icy. Running only tightens the noose. A search of Ferenc's room, ordered on the spot, uncovered a bundle of letters hidden in a medical textbook, Demands from the Baroness for repayment of a loan, threatening to expose his falsified credentials from a Vienna clinic. Blackmail, Nagy declared, holding up the papers. Ference's face crumpled. She drove me to ruin, but I didn't kill her. I swear it. His protest echoed the desperation of St. Mary Mead's grocer, who'd begged innocence when caught doctoring his scales. Miss Marple's mind whirred, piecing together fragments like a quilt. The letters confirmed the Baroness's penchant for control, much like the Vienna scandal that had shadowed her past. But Ference's panic seemed genuine. Fear of exposure, not murder. Her gaze drifted to Victor, whose wet footprints she'd recalled from the crime scene, contradicting his plunge pool alibi. And Clara's hidden compartment, headache powders, or a convenient lie? Professor Zoltan's vial, too, nagged at her. Its discovery felt too neat, like a prop placed for a village play to mislead the audience. As the meeting dissolved, guests scattering like leaves in the storm, Miss Marple lingered, her eyes on Herr Müller. His nervous hovering suggested more than managerial concern, perhaps a deeper stake in the hotel's secrets. She recalled a rumor from the café. The Baroness's will favored a charity, not Victor or Zoltan. Could Müller be tied to it? In St. Mary Mead, the churchwarden's sudden wealth had traced back to a charitable bequest that hid his embezzlement. Stepping into the corridor, she overheard Istvan whispering to a maid, his voice urgent. "Keep quiet about the maintenance log. It's missing pages from that night." The maid nodded, scurrying away. Miss Marple's lips pursed. Missing records were a classic dodge, like the time the parish ledger omitted entries to cover a theft. Istvan's role as the hotel's eyes and ears gave him access to every corner and every secret. Had he delivered more than towels to the Baroness's room? The storm raged on, lightning illuminating the bathhouse's spires like accusatory fingers. Miss Marple retired to her suite, the Danube's dark waters reflecting her thoughts. The salon had been a crucible, revealing cracks in every alibi. Victor's lies, Clara's secrets, Ference's debts, Zoltan's artifacts, Müller's anxiety, Istvan's omissions, each was a thread in a tangled skein. The cyanide's delivery remained the puzzle's heart. A vent, a towel, or something yet unseen. She thought of the almond scent, a clue as deliberate as a dropped glove in a village feud. Opening her diary, she jotted, "Motives abound, but method is key. Who knew the bathhouse's veins, its pipes and shadows?" Tomorrow she would shadow Istvan, perhaps, or coax Clara's guarded tongue. For now, the storm's howl seemed to echo the Baroness's final scream. A warning that the killer was still among them, hidden in the gathering dark. Chapter 6. Revelations in. The mist dawn broke over Budapest with a hesitant light, the storm's fury spent, leaving the Gellert Hotel cloaked in a damp hush. Miss Jane Marple, unable to sleep, rose early, her mind as restless as the Danube's currents, visible from her suite's window. The murder of Baroness Elena Kovacs had woven a tapestry of deceit, its threads, blackmail, greed, betrayal, tangling ever tighter. Yet the method of the crime, cyanide delivered through the bathhouse's steamy veins, remained elusive, like a shadow glimpsed through fog. She dressed in her sensible tweed skirt and lavender blouse, her knitting bag slung over one arm, and ventured into the bathhouse's deserted halls, determined to find clarity in the quiet. The air was heavy with the mineral scent of the thermal pools, their surfaces still as glass in the pre-dawn gloom. Miss Marple's slippers whispered on the mosaic floors as she navigated the maze of corridors, her eyes tracing the brass vents that snaked along the walls like arteries. Pausing at the entrance to the private steam rooms, she examined a vent near the fatal alcove. Its grill cool to the touch despite the warmth within. Kneeling with surprising agility for her 78 years, she peered closer, noting a faint powdery residue along the rim. Not the usual mineral crust, but something finer, almost crystalline. "Ingenious," she murmured, her mind flashing to a St. Mary Mead incident where a chemist's assistant had laced a vaporizer with sedative, claiming it was merely dust. Cyanide, soluble and volatile, activated by heat, like baking soda in a village scone, harmless until mixed. She made a mental note to share this with Inspector Nagy, though she suspected he'd scoff at her village fancies before testing the residue himself. Returning to the lobby, she found the hotel stirring, maids bustling with mops and porters carting linens. Istvan Sabot, his moustache drooping slightly from fatigue, was at his post, but his usual polish seemed frayed, his eyes darting as if expecting trouble. Miss Marple approached with a disarming smile. "Mr. Szabo, might you assist an old lady with a question about the bathhouse's plumbing? The vents seem so intricate. Do they require frequent maintenance?" His hands twitched, betraying the nerves she'd noted in the archives. "Oh, yes, madam, but our staff is meticulous. No faults in years." His voice was too quick, like the baker's lad who'd sworn the bread was fresh while hiding mouldy loaves. She thanked him, filing away his unease. Istvan's access to every corner of the hotel made him a pivot in this puzzle. Her next move was to seek out the suspects, probing their facades with the gentle persistence that had unraveled many a village secret. She found Victor Kovac in the cafe, nursing a black coffee, his gambler's pallor more pronounced under the morning light. "Mr. Kovac," she began, settling opposite with her tea, "I understand your stepmother settled your debts recently. Generous, considering the rumors about her will." His eyes narrowed, but her mild tone disarmed him. "She paid them to keep me quiet," he muttered, glancing around. "She was hiding something, letters in her suite proving she'd swindled family funds in Vienna. I didn't kill her, but I wanted those papers." His candor surprised her, echoing the blacksmith's son who'd confessed to petty theft to avoid a worse accusation. Blackmail, then, but not murder. Victor's desperation seemed to lack the cold precision of cyanide. Clara Beaumont was next, found in the ladies' lounge, reapplying her lipstick with a trembling hand. "Miss Beaumont," Miss Marple said, her voice soft as a vicar's sermon, "your note to Victor suggested fear, not conspiracy. Were you afraid of the Baroness?" Clara's mirror reflected a flicker of panic. She had photos, private ones from a foolish moment in Hollywood. She threatened to leak them unless I left Victor. I begged him to help me find them, but I'd never. Her voice broke, and Miss Marple nodded sympathetically, recalling the seamstress in St. Mary Mead, whose love letters had sparked a similar panic, though no blood was shed. Clara's fear was real, but her hands, steady now, suggested no killer's resolve. Professor Emil Zoltan was in the garden, examining a shard of pottery under a magnifier. "Professor," Miss Marple ventured, "that vial of cyanide. Could someone have tampered with its label?" He looked up, startled, his Roman coin glinting in his pocket. "Exactly my thought. I use it for preserving bone fragments. But the label was new, not my handwriting. Someone wanted me blamed." His indignation rang true, like the schoolmaster who'd been framed for vandalism with a planted paint can. Miss Marple's mind ticked. A planted vial, like the residue in the vent, pointed to a meticulous schemer. Dr. Laszlo Ferenc, cornered in the lobby, was less forthcoming. "Doctor, your knowledge of the vents. Did you ever experiment with their airflow?" she asked, her tone as innocent as a churchgoer's query. His face reddened. "I adjusted a valve once, to improve circulation, nothing sinister. The Baroness's threats were about my debts, not murder." His bluster reminded her of the village doctor who denied overprescribing until patient logs proved otherwise. Ferenc's expertise with chemicals was undeniable, but his panic suggested a man cornered by circumstance, not guilt. As noon approached, Miss Marple retreated to the bathhouse's central hall, where the pools shimmered under skylights now cleared of storm clouds. She sat on a tiled bench, her knitting a pretext for reflection. The residue in the vent was the key, a soluble cyanide compound, perhaps potassium or sodium cyanide, dissolved in water and fed through the steam system. It required knowledge of chemistry and the bathhouses, plumbing, narrowing the field. Victor lacked the technical skill, Clara the motive for such complexity. Zoltan's vial was too convenient a clue. Ferenc had the knowledge, but seemed too rattled to execute such a plan. Herr Müller's managerial oversight gave him access, but his motive remained murky. Istvan, however, moved through the hotel like a ghost, his nervous tics betraying hidden depths. A sudden memory surfaced. The porter's report of a cloaked figure tampering with vents. Could it have been Istvan, covering tracks or planting clues? In St. Mary Mead, the postman's quiet deliveries had masked his role in a smuggling ring, revealed only by a misplaced parcel. She resolved to examine the maintenance logs Istvan had mentioned. Suspecting their missing pages held more than routine repairs. The lunch bell rang, summoning guests to the dining room, but Miss Marple lingered. The bathhouse's silence amplifying her thoughts. The mist was clearing, not just in the air but in her mind. The killer had orchestrated a perfect crime, using the bathhouse's own elements, steam, heat, anonymity, against the Baroness. But perfection, she knew, always left a flaw, like the seamstress's uneven stitches that betrayed her theft. She tucked her knitting away, her eyes bright with purpose. The next revelation would come not from confrontation, but from watching the guilty betray themselves in the mist. Chapter 7. The Final Plunge. The sun hung low over Budapest, its golden rays piercing the Gellert Hotel's stained glass windows, casting fractured light across the bathhouse's marble halls. Miss Jane Marple, her lavender cardigan buttoned against the evening chill, stood at the threshold of the private steam rooms, where Baroness Elena Kovacs had met her end. The air still held a faint mineral tang, but the memory of cyanide's almond-like scent lingered in her mind, a ghostly clue that refused to dissipate. The threads of the mystery, blackmail, betrayal, hidden motives, had woven a complex web, and today, she sensed, the final knot would unravel. Inspector Garbonaghi had agreed to her request for a reenactment, a staged return to the crime scene to jolt the guilty into betrayal. As the suspects gathered, Miss Marple's keen eyes missed nothing, her thoughts as sharp as the knitting needles tucked in her bag. The private alcove, now scrubbed clean, felt like a stage awaiting its final act. The brass vent above the tiled bench hissed softly, its grill gleaming under the electric lamps. Nagy, his hawkish face set with determination, positioned his officers discreetly, their presence a silent warning. The suspects filed in, each face a mask of unease, Victor Kovacs, his gambler's twitch more pronounced, as if sensing a losing hand. Clara Beaumont, her Hollywood poise fraying, her eyes darting like a trapped bird's. Dr. Laszlo Ferenc, mopping his brow despite the cool air, his medical bag clutched like a shield. Professor Emil, Zoltan, his Roman coin spinning nervously between his fingers. Herr Karl Müller, the manager, his bald pate shining with sweat, his managerial authority crumbling. Istvan Chabot lingered at the rear, his moustache drooping, his hands fidgeting with a ring of keys that jangled like a guilty conscience. Nagy began, his voice cutting through the steam's soft hiss. We stand where Baroness Kovacs died, poisoned by cyanide delivered through these vents. A method requiring intimate knowledge of this bathhouse. Someone here orchestrated her death, and today we will see who flinches. He gestured to the vent, where Miss Marple had pointed out the crystalline residue, now confirmed by the police chemist as sodium cyanide, soluble in water and deadly when vaporized. The killer knew the system's quirks, how to introduce poison without leaving a trace. His eyes scanned the group, lingering on each face, as if daring them to break. Miss Marple stepped forward, her voice gentle but piercing, like a village gossip unveiling a scandal. Inspector, might I suggest we consider the maintenance logs? Mr. Szabo mentioned missing pages from the night of the murder. Curious, don't you think, for a hotel so meticulous? Istvan's face blanched, his keys clattering to the floor. I reported no such thing, he stammered. But Nagy's gaze sharpened. We found the log, Szabo. A page torn out, but a porter's note recorded a maintenance man entering the bathhouse hours before the scream. You signed him in. Care to explain? Istvan's moustache quivered. A routine worker, nothing more. I didn't see his face. Cloaked he was, like the porter said. His voice cracked, echoing the panic of St. Mary Mead's sexton, caught hiding stolen church funds behind a false ledger. Miss Marple turned to the group, her eyes soft but unyielding. Let us consider motives anew. Victor, your debts were paid, yet you sought letters proving the Baroness's misdeeds. Why risk murder when exposure would suffice? Victor's jaw tightened. I wanted justice, not her death. Those letters were my leverage. His candour felt raw, like the village lad who'd confessed to theft to clear his name of worse. To Clara, she said, your fear of those photos drove you to desperation, but poison requires a colder heart than yours. Clara's lips trembled, her denial a whisper. I only wanted freedom. Miss Marple nodded, recalling the seamstress whose panic had led to lies, not violence. To Dr. Ferenc, she said, your knowledge of chemicals is undeniable, but your panic suggests a man trapped, not triumphant. Ferenc's shoulders sagged. She'd have ruined me, but I swear I only adjusted the vents for airflow. His plea rang true, like the apothecary who'd wept when accused of tampering with prescriptions. Zoltan, clutching his coin, met her gaze. The vial was planted as I said. I'd never risk my work for murder. His indignation mirrored the schoolmaster's, framed unjustly until evidence cleared him. Then Miss Marple's gaze settled on Herr Müller. The Baroness's will named a charity, not these suspects, a curious choice. Yet rumours suggest you, Herr Müller, have ties to such a cause. Could it be personal? Müller's face reddened, his hands clenching. Preposterous! I'm a manager, nothing more. But Nagy interjected, holding up a document. We traced the charity, Müller. It's registered to a Karl von Hagen, your birth name, before you changed it. The Baroness's late husband was your half-brother, disinherited by their father, wasn't he? You blamed her for his ruin in Vienna. Another cyanide death. The room froze, the steam seeming to hold its breath. Miss Marple's voice was calm, cutting through the tension like a needle through cloth. The almond scent, Herr Müller, was deliberate, an echo of Vienna, meant to frame the past. You knew the bathhouse's pipes, had access to cleaning supplies laced with cyanide, and signed in a maintenance man, yourself, cloaked to avoid suspicion. The residue in the vent betrays you. Müller's eyes widened, his composure shattering. Lies! You've no proof. But he lunged for the door, only for Nagy's officers to seize him, his struggle as futile as the churchwarden's when caught pilfering in St. Mary Mead. The truth spilled out under Nagy's relentless questioning. Müller, born Karl von Hagen, had harboured a decades-long grudge against Elena, who'd inherited the family fortune while his brother withered in disgrace. The Vienna scandal, her husband's suicide, had been Müller's first attempt at revenge, but suspicion fell short. In Budapest, learning of her new will favouring his charity, a front for his own gain, he saw his chance. Using his knowledge of the bathhouse's antiquated plumbing, he'd dissolved cyanide from cleaning supplies into a water feed, letting the steam carry death to the Baroness's alcove. The almond sent a cruel nod to her husband's fate. As Müller was led away in cuffs, the bathhouse seemed to exhale, its oppressive air lightening. Victor, shaken, revealed a codicil to the will, restoring his inheritance, a secret the Baroness had kept to test him. Clara, her fears allayed, planned her return to Hollywood, vowing to choose lovers more wisely. Dr. Ferenc, chastened, promised to reform his practice, while Zoltan's artifacts were safe, his funding secured by a rival patron. Miss Marple stood by the pool, the mosaics gleaming under the restored sunlight. "The vapours carry secrets," she murmured, thinking of how the smallest clues, residue, a missing page, a vengeful past, had unravelled the crime. Nagy approached, tipping his hat. "Miss Marple, you've a devil's knack for seeing through steam." She smiled faintly, recalling St. Mary Mead's petty crimes that had honed her instincts. "People are the same, Inspector, whether in a village or a palace. Their shadows always betray them." Chapter 8. Waters of Resolution. The Gellert Hotel basked in a fragile calm as Budapest's morning sun gilded the Danube, its waters sparkling like a promise of renewal. Miss Jane Marple stood on her suite's balcony, her lavender shawl draped over her shoulders, watching the river's gentle flow. The arrest of Herr Karl Müller had lifted the pall of suspicion from the bathhouse, yet the air still hummed with the aftershocks of betrayal, as if the very tiles whispered of the secrets they'd witnessed. Her knitting bag rested on the table beside her, its contents untouched. For once, her hands were still, her mind savouring the resolution of a puzzle as intricate as any St. Mary Mead scandal. The cyanide's bitter almond scent had faded, but its lesson lingered. Even in the steamy opulence of Budapest, human nature was as predictable as a village feud. In the grand dining room, breakfast unfolded with a subdued elegance. Guests murmured over porcelain cups, their glances softer now, free of the fear that had clouded the past days. Miss Marple, seated at a corner table with a view of the room, sipped her chamomile tea and observed the players in this drama, now stepping into the light of their new realities. Victor Kovacs sat alone, his gambler's twitch replaced by a quiet resolve. The discovery of the will's codicil, revealed in Müller's confession as a test of Victor's loyalty, had restored his inheritance, a fortune in land and jewels that would secure his future. provided he curbed his reckless ways. Like young Freddie Sanders, Miss Marple mused, recalling the St. Mary Mead lad who'd squandered his inheritance on cards until a stern aunt set him straight. Victor caught her eye and offered a tentative nod, as if acknowledging her role in clearing his name. Clara Beaumont, radiant in a cream silk dress, was surrounded by admirers, her Hollywood charm restored. The Baroness's threatening photos, found in a locked drawer and discreetly destroyed by Inspector Nagy, no longer haunted her. She approached Miss Marple's table, her smile genuine but tinged with chagrin. "Miss Marple, I owe you an apology for my theatrics. I was so afraid. I nearly lost myself." Her voice held a new humility, and Miss Marple smiled kindly. "My dear, fear makes actors of us all. You'll shine brighter for it." Clara's departure for America was imminent, and Miss Marple sensed she'd choose her next role, on screen and in life, with greater care, much like the village seamstress who'd learned to guard her heart after a scandalous affair. Dr. Laszlo Ferenc, his portly frame less burdened, lingered near the buffet, discussing hydrotherapy with an elderly guest. The Baroness's blackmail letters, exposing his forged Vienna credentials, had been confiscated as evidence, but Nagy had promised discretion if Ferenc reformed his GU practice. "I've a second chance," he confided to Miss Marple later, his gravelly voice earnest. "No more shortcuts." She nodded, thinking of the apothecary in St. Mary Mead, who'd rebuilt his reputation after a brush with disgrace. Ferenc's expertise, once a shadow of suspicion, would now serve healing, not harm. Professor Emil Zoltan, his Roman coin tucked safely in his pocket, was in high spirits, his excavations funded anew by a Swiss patron who valued his work without strings. He paused by Miss Marple's table, his weathered face alight. "The Baroness's demands nearly cost me my life's work, but your insight saved me, madam." She waved off his gratitude, recalling the schoolmaster whose framed innocence had restored his honor. "Truth has a way of surfacing, Professor, like artifacts from your digs." Zoltan's latest find, a votive tablet, would grace a museum, not a blackmailer's vault. The bathhouse itself, cleansed of its grim associations, buzzed with renewed vitality. Guests soaked in the turquoise pools, their laughter echoing off the mosaic walls, as if the steam had carried away the last traces of poison. Miss Marple wandered its halls one final time, her slippers silent on the tiles. The brass vents, now inspected and secured, hissed innocently, their role in the crime a fading memory. She paused by the private alcove, picturing Muller's cloaked figure, his cyanide-laced solution seeping through the pipes, a plan as cold as the village churchwarden's embezzlement, undone by a single overlooked detail. The residue Miss Marple had spotted, a crystalline confession in the steam. Inspector Nagy joined her, his cigarette replaced by a rare smile. "Miss Marple, Budapest owes you a debt. You saw what my men missed, the human heart behind the machinery." She chuckled softly, her eyes twinkling. "Inspector, machines are simple. It's people who complicate matters. In my village, a misplaced glance or a hurried step often tells the tale." Nagy tipped his hat, promising to visit St. Mary Mead someday, though she doubted he'd find its quiet lanes as thrilling as Budapest's intrigues. In the lobby, Istvan Szabó resumed his post, his moustache freshly waxed, his nerves steadied. The missing log pages, recovered from Muller's office, had cleared him of complicity, though Miss Marple suspected his anxious whispers had shielded smaller secrets, perhaps a tip pocketed or a favour owed. Like the postmistress, she thought, who knew every letter but kept her own counsel. She offered him a kind nod as she passed, knowing his role, however minor, had helped weave the net that caught the killer. As she packed her carpet bag, preparing for the train back to England, Miss Marple reflected on the case's echoes of her village. The Baroness, like Mrs. Eldridge, had wielded power through secrets, only to fall to a deeper grudge. Müller's vengeance, rooted in a Vienna betrayal, mirrored the eye of churchwarden's greed, hidden behind a mask of respectability. The bathhouse, with its steaming pools and hidden pipes, was merely a grander stage for the same human follies, jealousy, fear, ambition, that played out in St. Mary Mead's cottages. Boarding the train at Coletti Station, she settled into her compartment, the city's spires fading into the dusk. Raymond would be delighted to hear her rheumatism had eased, but she'd tell him the true cure was the puzzle itself, sharpening her mind as no mineral water could. "People are predictably unpredictable," she murmured, watching the Danube recede. The Gellert's waters had healed more than her joints. They'd reminded her that truth, like steam, rises to the surface, no matter how deep the shadows. Back in St. Mary Mead, over tea with her friend Dolly Bantry, she'd recount the tale with her usual modesty, letting the village gossip weave its own embellishments. The cyanide, the vents, the vengeful brother, details that would thrill the parish, though none would surprise Miss Marple. For in Budapest or a country lane, the heart's dark currents ran the same, and her quiet observation had always been enough to navigate them. As the train's whistle sounded, she opened her diary, its pages filled with neat script. The final entry read, Budapest, October 1925. A murder solved by what was seen and what was not said. The vapours hide much, but never all. She closed the book, her smile faint but satisfied, ready for the next mystery that human nature, in its endless folly, would surely provide.